Behind every major transformation in the healthcare industry is a quiet force, someone who sees the complexity, hears the noise, and still chooses clarity.
I don't think people understand the role pharmaceutical companies have. I think pharmaceutical companies get a lot of bad press and heat for everything, but it's a very risky innovation that pharmaceuticals do.
Because getting medicine to patients isn't just a process, it's a promise. And few people understand that better than our today's guest.
I would say in Newark at the time in the mid 90s, it was probably 60, 80% of all the medical ICU beds were HIV patients.
Annette Zoe Powers is the Senior Vice President at Bristol Myers Squibb and a trailblazer in the world of market access, pricing, and patient-focused innovation.
In the pharmaceutical industry, it's really about connections, who you know, and all the roles I've ever had has been through someone I've met or through connections.
As a leader, do you lead more with your head or heart?
That's a really good question. It's really hard to separate the head and the heart. I would say, for the most part, you have to do the head more because during work, you have just developed friendships or close relationships, but you have to use your head because you have to do right for the organization, not what's right for Annette.
And how do you navigate the balance between commercial strategy and patient-centric access?
So I think they should be the same. You can work really hard, but that doesn't always happen. So I'm not quite answering your question, but I would say that I learned that sometimes things are not really fair. I feel like fairness and transparency are critical. And it's not easy. I've had a lot of managers in my career, as you can imagine. You know, I always say feedback's a gift. And I will say, given my end of year reviews, it's been variable, caution.
If you've ever wondered what it takes to create change from the inside out, or how true leadership is forged in the moments no one sees, this conversation is for you. Behind every major transformation in the healthcare industry is a quiet force. Someone who sees the complexity, hears the noise, and still chooses clarity. Someone who can look at a system designed decades ago and ask the uncomfortable question, is this still serving the people who need it most? Healthcare today isn't just about science, it's about access, it's about equity. It's about the relentless pursuit of change in a system where the stakes couldn't be higher. Because getting medicine to patient isn't just a process, it's a promise. And few people understand that better than our today's guest. Annette Zoe Powers is the Senior Vice President at Bristol Myers Squibb and a trailblazer in the world of market access, pricing, and patient-focused innovation. But this episode isn't just about policies or pharma. It's about purpose. It's about how one leader balances data with empathy, strategy with soul, and business outcomes with real-world impact. We'll talk about the future of access, the evolving expectations of leadership, and the decisions that aren't just tough, they're deeply human. We'll go beyond corporate boardroom to explore the life lessons that shape how Annette leads, thinks, and lives. If you've ever wondered what it takes to create change from the inside out, or how true leadership is forged in the moments no one sees, this conversation is for you. This is not just a story about pharmaceutical industry, it's a story about vision, about alignment, about what happens when someone chooses to lead with both courage and compassion. Anit, welcome to Drug Diaries.
Thank you, Kaushik. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an honor and a pleasure for me as well. So, Anit, can you walk us through your career journey and what led you to your current role at BMS?
Yes, well, having been working in the workforce for over 30 years, I'll start when I started in pharmacy school. What led me to pharmacy school was my chemistry teacher in 10th grade. And it's something that I always wondered more about the drugs that people took and the science behind it. And when I was in pharmacy school, I had decided to go get my Doctor of Pharmacy, my PharmD. That was something that was very new at Rutgers. I was the third class graduating with a PharmD. It was all bachelors at that point. And I knew this was probably going to be the future. So if you hear one thing about my journey is preparing for the marathon and not for a sprint. So even though I'm sure I know I was not fond of being in school for any longer. I decided to go get my PharmD. When I graduated with my PharmD, I really had two avenues. I could have gone into pharmaceutical industry right away,
Mhm.
or I could go to the journey of actually working in a pharmacy and getting some clinical clinical experience.
Right.
And I opted for the less profitable working in an inner city hospital and working in this was in the 90s, working in Newark, which was really a hotbed for HIV at that time, Kaushik. So I spent 4 years, a little over 4 years at Newark Beth Israel as a clinical ICU and infectious disease pharmacist, where I rounded every day in the ICU. And during that time, this was before HIV triple therapy. I saw patients come into the ICU every day and dying very painful deaths and deaths that of diseases you just don't see anymore. And during that time, triple therapy was coming out, and it was actually revolutionary with how HIV/AIDS was being treated. And as I said, as I started my career, I would say at Newark at the time in the mid 90s, it was probably 60-80% of all the medical ICU beds were HIV patients. And I know I don't have to tell anyone on this podcast now, but now it's been you just don't see patients with HIV in the hospital, and they spend years and they die. They have normal lives and they die of like cardiovascular disease. So it's amazing how triple therapy and the innovation that pharmacy has brought to a very deadly and sad disease. So during that time, I probably always knew I wanted to go into industry. Living in New Jersey, it's a mecca for pharmaceutical industry. And after 4 years and being in the ICU and being in the hospital, I felt like I got my experience for working in the hospital. I was doing some talks with pharmaceutical companies, and I was offered a role at Johnson and Johnson doing medical information.
Mhm.
So it's a great first role for someone new to industry. And I did that for a year. But I was also at that time, I started my MBA. So I was really interested in pharmacoeconomics at that time. And I started that in the hospital. I met the pharmacoeconomics lead at J&J and started talking to him and was really interested in working with him. He left J&J and then went to Bristol Myers Squibb and recruited me from J&J to BMS. So I will say that one thing also, besides knowing it's a marathon, your career, the other thing I would say, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, it's really about connections, who you know, and all the roles I've ever had has been through someone I've met or through connections. So when I was recruited from that person who was leading pharmacoeconomics at J&J went to BMS. He recruited me for a medical affairs role at BMS. And I ended up spending 11 years at Bristol Myers Squibb.
Wow.
I started in medical affairs and then moved up within medical. I had been MSL director, and I would say about 9 years into my journey at BMS, they wanted to start a field HEOR team, which was back to my first love. I had finished my MBA at that time. I was really interested in pharmacoeconomics or health economics outcomes research. You have to realize in the early 2000s, this wasn't popular. People
Mhm.
didn't know what health economics was or pharmacoeconomics. It was something new, but it really was rooted into my time in the hospital, seeing how drugs could profoundly change the outcomes of patients back then. So I was fortunate enough they asked me to start and lead the field's health economics outcomes research team at BMS. It was the first time it ever existed, and we started with a team of 3. Right now, that team has a team of over 30. And now, if you can imagine, this was in mid to early 2000s. Now, a lot of pharmaceutical companies have a field HEOR team. So starting that team, what allowed me is to get more involved in market access. So I started to get more involved in market access, meet with customers and the payer customers. And then, as with a lot of changes, I had personal changes, Kaushik. I had gotten married and I had starting to have a family. Part of me really wanted to move back and closer to my family in the northern part of New Jersey. And just circumstance, the head of the Health Economics Outcomes Research Group went to go lead this team and started a whole new team at Eisai Pharmaceuticals. And she called me. She's like, Annette, I really need people on my team. Would you consider coming and being part of my team? This was in northern New Jersey. It was 15 minutes from my house. And anyone who knows, just being a working mother and being able to be so physically close instead of driving an hour and a half to my other job, it was just such a blessing. I had never worked at a medium-sized company. I was at J&J and I was at BMS. So going to a company like Eisai, which was small to medium size, was a big change. So I decided to join her there. I think one of the things that it really taught me at being at a medium-sized company or smaller is to wear a lot of hats. So I was able to not only help lead the field team, but also do, home office HUR work and also interact very closely with the market access team. My boss that recruited me resigned, and I was promoted to her role. And through organizational changes, was able to go from someone, I started my career as a pharmacist in the hospital, then medical. And my first kind of foray into a completely commercial role was given to me at Eisai. And I was asked, you're doing a great job. HUR is doing well. Would you also like to continue your journey and lead patient services? I knew nothing, Kaushik, about patient services teams. So this is about patient reimbursement. It's about leading hub services. This is US based. So hub services, a field account reimbursement team. So it was, I would say, a 180 from what I've done in the past. It was much more patient focused and dealing with all the copay cards, all the reimbursement. I had never had done that. And some of your listeners may get a copay card if you're listening from the US for a prescription. The amount of work that goes into a copay card or into the website or the work that goes behind that is a lot. You have to have a lot of review meetings. You have to get legal compliance. Everything has to be well marked. Everything goes on a website, on the patient reimbursement website. So it's definitely my first foray into commercial. And I will say it's not something I had asked for, but it's something I'm so glad that I was given that opportunity because that was my first commercial job. Then I was able, I spent 9 years at Eisai. I was able to get experience through leading the account field team, the access or payer marketing teams, the oncology, GPO teams, employer teams, and I know I'm forgetting something, but basically I was leading market access for the US. So having come in on HUR, it's not common for someone to pivot directly into a commercial role, but I was fortunate enough to be given that opportunity. And I say I always get my next opportunity was someone that used to work for me. He worked at Celgene and he was leaving Celgene and he called me up. He's like, Annette, I'm leaving Celgene. Would you want to consider taking my role? So, I was at that point to leave Eisai just because of the pipeline, and it was really not much for a pipeline for Eisai. So he resigned. He gave my CV to his manager at the same time. And I was hired to lead Celgene, the U.S. Health Economics Outcomes Research Team. And It was a great, similar to Azai. You get to wear a lot of hats at Celgene. It was very entrepreneurial. It was very fast moving, so fast moving that less than a year that I was at Celgene, I was driving to work and I'm reading that Bristol Myers Squibb is buying Celgene. So I call myself a boomerang because now I'm back to BMS where I feel like I started my career. I was in my 20s when I started that, and now I came full force back. Came back as working HUR, then again, similar to my time at AZI, then went to take over access marketing for the US, and then really to expand my responsibilities, Kaushik, went into
Right.
global a few years ago. So have global responsibilities. Then HUR was added back to me or added to me on my team, and now US. So I have a pretty large role now at BMS.
That's an incredibly inspiring and eventful career trajectory with a lot of diverse background and experiences. So, how has your leadership style evolved over the course of these many years, and what principles guide you in your current role, Annette?
I was thinking about it. I was so fortunate at BMS when I led an MSL team. I think about it. I was 29 and I had a team of 30. And I was I believe I was the second youngest person on my entire team. So I managed a big team and I was, one of the youngest on that team.
Wow.
But I don't think my management style changed that much, believe it or not, from my first time. One, when I was getting my MBA, they make you take a course called organizational behavior, which really made me start thinking about managing people differently. And, as any employer or manager, you have a diverse group of employees. Some people you can be very frank to, some people you just might to be a little gentler when you talk to them. But no matter what, I think I've always been transparent. I feel like we're all adults in this workplace. And I feel that, as adults and as people and how I would want to know, I would always want to know the truth. So I'm a huge believer in feedback as a gift. So that end of the year reviews with my direct reports, no one is blindsided because people know during the year things that they need to work on. And, if you're the CEO of an organization or if you're an intern, there's not anyone in this organization that couldn't improve. And the only way to improve is to be given feedback. So I think from my time at 29 to my time, and I won't say my age, but many years later, it's something that hasn't changed. And I'll continue to, one, manage and take care of the team that I have, because I think that's incredibly important. I always say if you want to know a good leader is ask the people that work for that person, because that's the most important thing. Manage differently, but always manage fairly and transparently.
Right, right. And market access is a critical component of healthcare delivery, which is evolving quite rapidly with the advent of technology and the new approaches. How would you define its role in today's pharmaceutical industry?
Beginning, we hear a lot about AI, ChatGPT technology, and, my two kids have been utilizing it much more, longer than I have. I think it's a great way for things. You just have to choose carefully. So I would say one thing that I think is important is how we can utilize AI is, I think, helping with models, cost effectiveness models, making sure that every country has a different reimbursement landscape. So being able to utilize AI and technologies to be able to rapidly change and make bespoke models for the different countries. I think when it comes to protocol writing, systemic literature reviews, SLRs, this is a very time consuming process. I remember going into Medline and doing lit searches. To be able to do that with really the snap of the fingers is amazing. I think you also have to be careful not to overuse it, because sometimes it's a computer, it's technology. So depending on what kind of data is out there, because there's a lot of bad data out there as well. You have to be really careful, and you
Exactly.
need a human to make sure that there's accuracy and it's not being utilized wrongly or making incorrect assumptions based on that. But I do think it's going to continue to grow. We have been talking for the last 20 years about data. So the ability to mine data, to do it quicker, I think would be a great way to look at futures in the future and to be able to look at RWE. But I also caution, because if you make mistakes, if it's not being done correctly, you could, as I said before, come with very different conclusions to what you might be looking at. And data sometimes can be manipulated. So you have to be very careful.
Right. And how do you navigate the balance between commercial strategy and patient-centric access?
So I think they should be the same. No, I don't think that they're at odds. I think you might have to do things differently depending
Hmm.
on where you're getting access from. But I know your audience, and I know for me, and I know my colleagues in market access in industry, one of the reasons we're attracted to this is because we want to make sure that we are getting access to patients, our medicines to patients, because we are bringing innovative medicines to patients. So everyone's goal in pharma is really to get access to patients, no matter where they live. In countries like the US or Germany and Japan, it's a very different access landscape than we're going into sub-Saharan Africa. So we'll have to pivot and do different access. There are different access challenges for that. But I do think, I don't think that they're at odds. I think that we have to do things differently. I'm fortunate to be able to sit on our, access panel and governance panel for our ESG work. And part of that is, how do we improve access in lower and middle income countries?
Right.
And, we really strove to really do things differently to bring some of these brands. But there's, policy hurdles. There's issues that we might be concerned with parallel trade and movement of products in and out of different countries. So we have to be careful, but it's something that pharmaceutical companies are keenly aware of and, definitely striving to improve.
And in your opinion, what are some of the biggest barriers patients face in accessing life-saving therapies, and how can we address them?
Yes, I think as I said, I think it's very different in different countries. I'll start with the US and then I'll go globally. In the US, I think the healthcare system is really complicated. And I don't think patients understand how to get medicines in particular or what there is to offer. People sometimes are not willing or will skip a medication or not willing to fight their insurance organization or not. And I talked about copay cards, may not be aware of copay cards that might decrease the copays that patients will take. And then you have abandonment rates, Kaushik, which is
Yes.
a big problem in the US. If you have, government insurance, you can't take a copay card, but there may be other avenues to get medicines. But I will say, working in cell therapy, which is life savings, and working in like oncology, and, we have products that are truly life saving. The last thing that we would want, as a company is to, patients that really need these medicines not to get that. So I encourage, if there's any patients listening to that, if you're one, fight for your medicine that you need, educate yourself, go to the company website of a medicine you particularly want, because you can find a lot of information. Most pharmaceutical companies have a reimbursement section of their reimbursement website, or can scan, which you can link to from their main website, which will have information to get better reimbursed in there.
Right.
Outside the US, and this is getting more complicated with some of the changes that are happening politically with tariffs and with some of these executive orders. But even if you're in areas in, high income countries in Europe, there's still a delay to get these medicines. In US, once a drug is approved, generally soon after you can get the product. in Europe and other countries, even though it might be approved by the EMEA, it still may take many months, if not years, to then get reimbursed. So you have a lag time from the US to different countries in Europe or outside the US to get reimbursed. There may not be even an infrastructure to get life-saving. And I spoke about cell therapy. It's not easy to get cell therapy. It's not
Yes.
if you can't walk into a doctor's office or a hospital and just get it. It takes weeks of preparation to get it. And, unfortunately, in many countries, you just don't have access to that type of healthcare. Drugs such as oral products are much easier to give out. But I know even in our IO treatment, you have to train the physicians, the hospitals to give these medicines. So you have to be really careful. And there's not even a hurdle to get reimbursement. There's a hurdle to be able to show how to give that product. So there's a lot of different challenges that happen, but it's something that, is important. I know access is growing around the world every year and is expected to grow so that most patients can get access even in lower and middle income countries in the future by 2030.
Right. And although we did touch upon this topic a little bit, but just to expand on this question a little bit more, how do you see the intersection of digital health, AI, and market access evolving in the next decade or so?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And I think probably the newer generation will utilize it a lot. I know for me, just helping, writing emails, it comes up. I have a little chat GPT that comes up like, oh, do you want to respond to this formally? And or performance reviews, you can put some information. So I think there's time savings just on more menial and tasks, such as like everyday tasks. But I do think when it comes to major projects that I know we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, for many products such as SLRs, dossiers, cost effectiveness models, clinical trials. This will be the future. It's going to be revolutionary. Like I said, I think we're not quite there yet, but I think we will get there. Amount of time savings that we will do. Just even this morning, I was looking for a file and I was just able to go into my local like ChatGPT and pull everything with that topic on there, which goes through all my files on my computer. I know if I have let's say an insurance question or a benefits question, I can look through all the BMS files on that. So so it's not just why I say that it's not just the projects that we do in market access, which I said when I stated all the others, but I think it's a time savings and all the other work because it adds up. You don't realize how much you might spend time looking for files or time you might spend, working on something. If that can save you time, then you can spend time on, other important aspects of your roles.
Right. And Annette, with growing interest in value-based pricing models, how do you see the industry adapting?
I have worked on them in the US. Let me first talk about ex-US. Ex-US, they're happening already. We have many companies and it's easier with a single payer system, have worked on, these agreements with different ministries of health, whether it's, more of an indication-based pricing, whether it's a volume limit. This is, quite frankly, not uncommon to do this. Especially with products with many, many indications, you start to have price discussions or value discussions with the different countries. In the U.S., it's been much more difficult. I told you I had a long career in HUR on the U.S. And in the U.S., it's a very singularly year by year system because if you're a commercial patient, which is pretty much everyone under 65, you might switch plans year to year. So if you look at a value-based agreement, unless it can be done within a year, it's very hard because if I have plan A, but then next year to go to plan B, the payer is not as interested in it because they're losing the patient. Having said that, I do think, and this is why I think HUR is so important, I do think outcomes is the key. Unfortunately, which I said in the US, sometimes you can't see some of these outcomes, but I bring this up all the time, and I have direct experience with that. If you think about HIV, when AZT came out, it was a single product. It quickly got approved by the FDA. AZT doesn't do anything when it's used alone. You quickly get resistance to it. And then it didn't do anything with survival. If that drug came out today, it would never get approved. It would not ever get
Yes.
reimbursed outside the US. However, if you didn't have AZT, DDI, DDC, protease inhibitors, and getting these triple regimens treatment, is how we are able to make HIV a chronic disease. It's very true in oncology as well. You might start with PFS, progression-free survival. It may take, in some very indolent diseases, which there are many in oncology, years. It's very hard for a pharmaceutical company to do a 5-year study, to look at the value and to look at the outcomes for that. So, some of the things I like to think of is if, let's say you have some real world evidence data, because at launch, it's just impossible to get that data at launch. But if we were able to get that data by collecting that data long term, could we then advocate for a price increase? Right now, that's not how it works, based on RWE and doing a study like that. But I truly believe, and this is true of all kind of value-based agreements, it should be two-way, right? The person that's doing the payer or the country that's paying for it should have some skin in the game to be able to, one, make sure patients are do what they can to increase their medicines, getting education on the disease area, where we should be able to, say, hey, if this drug is not working, you'll get some type of agreement. So I do think we're going to be smarter in the future on how to do that. I think there will be probably changes within at least the US government on how to make that architect work and not affect some of the government pricing. So I think it's probably the future. And I think with better data, better technology, we'll be able to monitor patients and do more of these.
Right. And Annette, personally, what has been the most rewarding aspect of working in market access for you?
I always say this, but it's the patients, and fundamentally, and I think this is really important, is not to forget, like, for every product you make, that there's a patient that could benefit from that. And, I will say at my organization, we generally start all our town halls with the patient. And
Really?
yeah, and it's so, I have been able to see such amazing patient stories. And I mean, it's really what we do, why we're here. And to me, access, you asked me why I like access. One, because we're fighting to make sure we get access to these patients. But two, it's becoming such an important aspect of everything we do. You can't go a day without hearing about pricing or access of patients, like in the news.
Yes.
And I think it's a really interesting field to be in. And, I started medical, and you heard my career, I started medical, but I never thought about going back to medical, just because this is, I feel like, very interesting, very ever changing. It's, really patient centric from all parts of it. I mean, when I started in the patient services team, it was all about that patient. I mean, I would talk to patients on the phone. So yeah, I think that's the reason. I mean, honestly, I think that's probably the mission for everyone in any company, no matter what role you're in, you know, is just making sure patients get their medicines and seeing what they can do for patients.
Right. And if you could change one thing about the current market access landscape, what would it be?
I don't think people understand the role pharmaceutical companies have, and the innovation that it brings. And I will say, I wish like we could educate patients more. I wish we could educate the government more. It's just very complicated. When people say, "Oh, there's high prices in the U.S.," no one really understands the real price and what that means. So I do think we need to do a much better job advocating for the work that we're doing. I think pharmaceutical companies get a lot of bad press and heat for everything, but it's a very risky innovation that pharmaceuticals do. There are a lot of products that don't make it, a lot of studies that fail, even products that do get approved. It's not easy for them to be successful. Just getting approved doesn't mean anything. And people don't understand it's about getting paid. It's actually getting these products paid for and getting utilized. And to me, I think for market access is people to understand that. And, even people I work with that are not in market access, they're like, oh, I'm like, this is a great career, market access. But I think people like, I don't, it seems so abstract to them to understand that, like the IRA or, Obamacare. There's a lot that goes into that. It's a lot of education, and you have to have a real knack for understanding it and the nuances and to be ahead of the game for that.
And Annette, when you're not wearing the title of Senior Vice President at BMS, who are you at your core? What values do you hold closest to your heart?
Yeah, and I'm sure you probably heard this, family's always first. And I feel that like that as a core has always been that way. I grew up, I'm an immigrant to the US, grew up, we came here. I was young. I was the youngest of 4 children with my parents, moving to New Jersey, living with my uncle in their basement for a year. And, that really taught me to, typical immigrant mentality, work hard, succeed, take care of family first. So, for my work, and the people that work for me, I always tell them, family first, don't worry about it. Like, trust me, like my company will survive, if I leave or, if I'm not happy at my house or my home, then there's a problem. So at my core, being a mother of 2, it was kind of one in this last 2 years being an empty nester. Both of them have left. Um, very hard for me to like adjust to that because I was used to being busy on the weekends, going to games, going to activities, being with them. But then, I actually have my oldest is actually working now, so even out of college. So to me, more to come. I think there's going to be more to what's about me. I'm sure when I retire, it's going to be very different Annette as well. But for me, family always comes first, striving to do the best that I can, but not at expense of like just my personal life and my family.
Right. And what do you think people misunderstand about you most often, either professionally or personally?
Yeah, it's interesting. As you move up in the organization, I mean, people that know me, but, as I meet with people that are new to pharmaceutical companies, I think they see me as this, someone of like so much power or someone that's very, I would say more intimidating. And, I don't ever view that to me, I'm like, no, it's fine. I have a very open door policy. I do one-on-ones all the time at, all levels of the organization. It doesn't matter. The title is just a title, and quite frankly, a lot of the people below me are the ones who are actually doing the significant work. Yes, I'm leading it, and I'm fortunate to have been promoted and to get higher up in the organization. But to be fair, a lot of the people in the company that are doing the most meaningful work that is moving the company forward are the ones at the director level, associate director level. And, they're the ones that should be getting a lot of the credit.
That's very kind and generous of you. And What's something that has profoundly changed the way you see the world, whether it's a book or a person or a moment, a failure?
I think you learn one, I think you learn a lot more from your failures. Two, well, I will say something that's more recent. Last year, I went to three funerals, ranging from someone in their 40s to about, I think about 58 years old. So all three very unexpected funerals. It definitely made me rethink my life, made me rethink my future. You know, they always say you don't ever regret not working hard enough when you're on your deathbed. And I think there's some truth to that. So for me, that had a profound effect to me on like my outlook. And that's probably why I've even more rooted into like why that patient mission is so important. Because my mission can't be getting to my next level. I mean, listen, I don't want to be CEO of the company. I don't want to be chief operating officer. This is a great role for me. So then what is your mission, right? I think previously it was to move up for work, but you have a much shorter runway once you get, you move up in organization. So you have to think about what is your mission? What do you want to do? And one is, always to be happy, to be content. But I think too, I'd like to see the next generation for me of leaders that are underneath me right now move up. And, I love to make an impact to patients in this job. And, it's something that I can do both with my career right now.
Annette, what has success taught you that failure never could, and vice versa?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, it's interesting, as an Asian immigrant, and I don't know if you feel this way, you work hard, as a kid, and success you think about, and I know I will say, Asians think this, if you work hard, you'll always succeed, and sometimes that's not true, right? Sometimes
Yes.
success, you can work really hard, but that doesn't always happen. So I'm not quite answering your question, but I would say that I learned that sometimes things are not really fair, that sometimes you get things that may or may not, or you fail may or may not be related to what you've done or what you've accomplished. But that's a key learning for like, and it's probably true. I know it's true in a organization, but it's probably true in academia as well.
Yeah.
It's not always just working hard and doing your best that gets you ahead. There's other aspects of that. So for me, success is probably what I've learned is I've always tried to be an avid learner and do things differently. And what I mean by that is I could have stayed in medical. I could have
Hmm.
stayed in HEOR. I could have had a really satisfying job and done really
Hmm.
well, but it wasn't. Why I think I was successful is because I made sure I took a lot of these lateral roles. And Kaushik, when I was explaining all the different roles I took, like, at
Hmm.
ASI moving to commercial, these weren't promotions. These were just
Yes.
gaining these different experiences, some promotions, but gaining these different experiences along the way. And why I always tell like people I give career discussions to is it's a marathon because yes, you can move up quickly. And I could have if I stayed and
Hmm.
moved up. Maybe I've been senior director, executive director. Maybe I could have been, a VP in medical if I stayed. But to being able to move laterally has made me successful because yes, I understand why you're talking about in my role now because I ran patient services, I ran account teams, I ran the marketing teams to understand that. So for me, it's success as to me has been smart choices for that. I mean, that's what has taught me. And yes, now my career is different. And I look at a lot of my peers who have maybe moved up more quickly than I did in the beginning. But at the end, to me, I'm probably higher than they are now, or, and it wasn't because I was kept on pushing for it.
As a leader, do you lead more with your head or heart? And how do you maintain that balance in a corporate world that often prioritizes logic over emotion?
Yes, it's a really good question. It's really hard to separate the head and the heart. I would say, for the most part, you have to do the head more because during work, you have just developed friendships or close
Mm,
relationships, but you have to use your head because you have to do right for the organization, not what's right for Annette. You can't just promote your best friend. You can't just look out. You have to do what's fair. So I will say in general, you're going to utilize your head more. Although, with recent changes in the organization, it's your heart that suffers. It's, seeing
yes.
great people leave the organization. So you can't separate the heart and the head. I would love to say you always use your head more. It's really hard to separate that. Your heart's going to take, a beating or your win, depending on what you have to do. But you try to take emotion out of it as much as possible. And what I try to do is have the enterprise mindset and the organizational
Mm,
mindset, which is much more brain logic. Although, when these changes happen, it's hard to say that your heart's not being affected either way.
yeah, right. And what do you believe is your most underrated strength as a leader? Something that doesn't appear on your LinkedIn profile but defines your impact.
Yeah, I do think this is my brand, and I've said it a few times, and that's transparency. I feel like fairness and transparency are critical. And it's not easy. I've had a lot of managers in my career, as you can imagine. I always say feedback's a gift. And I will say, given my end of year reviews, it's been variable, Kaushik.
Yeah.
I've had really cursory reviews. They're good reviews. But, I want to hear what I have to improve upon. I want to hear how do I get to the next level. And to me, that's a point that I make sure, like, and I said this before, at the end of your review, I don't want there to be surprises with the people on my team. And, the one thing you'll hear from me, it may not be great news, but it'll be always fair and it'll be transparent. And, as a leader in the organization, we have to give some bad news many times. But it's one of the things I've always pushed for to my managers is let's get out there. Let's make sure people know. I don't want them to be surprised when this comes out. Because one thing at any organization is you always hear like murmurs or,
Yes.
gossip. I would much rather people hear it from the leaders than from someone else. So to me, that's critical. And I would say that's my brand. And I've always been known for that as being very transparent and authentic.
When you look back 10 to 20 years from now, what kind of leader would you hope people remember you as?
Well, I've been a leader now for over 20 years, Kaushik. And so I have a lot of people that have reported to me. And, I hope I get to work for them one day. Some of those people that I help train. But, I hope they know that, I've helped them in their career. And it's funny now being at more the end of my career that I've gotten to see people be so successful. And as a leader, and it's not a trivial thing to say, there's nothing that you can be more proud of if you helped in a little part helping someone become successful in their his or her role in the future. And I hope I gave them good advice. I hope I gave them like that feedback, as I just mentioned before, that's so critical to make them go to the next level. But yeah, I hope that I would have some impact on their career, as their manager
I'm sure.
and hopefully
I'm
their
sure.
friend.
And Annette, what's a piece of advice you once received that completely changed the trajectory of your life?
I'd say it was probably the way I grew up. And people will not believe this, but I never have chased money, ever.
Really?
Never. I've never gone for a role. To be honest, I couldn't even tell you my salary right now. I know ballpark, but I couldn't tell you. I mean, I know my daughter could tell you to the penny how much she makes per year. And I know ballpark, but I couldn't even tell you my salary. So I think in the very beginning, and I told you my career when I started as I could make a lot more money than a clinical pharmacist did at a grad school. I was making less as a clinical pharmacist than my friends working retail pharmacy. You know, as a 4 or 5 year old, that's a pretty mature decision. I mean, I had some college debt, but to go for the experience, not take a pharma job right away, but to go for the experience. And I worked in Newark, which again, not only didn't pay as well as other roles, but also in a city that wasn't like, it wasn't a mecca to like people were clamoring to run to Newark in the middle of the 90s during the HIV era. So I think I've always been really mature in, you know, not going for that golden ring, not leaving for the golden ring, but leaving for the best opportunity. And, you know, you say, what's your heart or your brain? You know, I left for AZI really for family reasons. I was 29 and a director with 30 reports at BMS. But once you start a family and being near my family, my mother and my father, that was a big decision to make that change. And that's why I did it. Never look back. You know, I think my high school quote was make the right decision, make the decision right. I'm a firm believer.
Wow.
I'm a firm believer in that. You know, I don't know what my trajectory would have been if I stayed at BMS and didn't move to a place closer. I'm sure I would have been fine. But, you know, I really enjoy like that I got to do different experiences and was able to go to 2 different companies, get different experience from that. So who knows? But I do think don't chase the money, chase your experience, and make sure during that time you push yourself and get different roles during your career. Don't feel too, don't get too complacent.
Right.
Don't get complacent. Push yourself.
I was going to ask my next question about career advice to people who are looking to advance their careers in market access, but you've answered that already so beautifully, so beautifully. Such a powerful piece of advice there. Annette, when was the last time you changed your mind about something important?
That's a good question. I changed my mind a lot for things, but you know, I will say I wasn't sure about the global role going into global market access. I spent my 20 plus years in the US side, and it was like learning from like taking on a new role. It was pretty daunting to me. I didn't know much about it. It was basically, Annette, take this role. You need to do this for your career. So that was a major decision. It would mean one, learning a lot again, because I was very, you know, I was very comfortable, you know, I would say complacent in my previous role, which I knew I needed to change. But this was a bigger change. It would mean more traveling. It's a very different role, global market access from US market access. US market
Yes.
access is very tactical. It's very like I can tell you the weekly sales of all our products. It's very much in that. Global is much more longer term thinking, clinical trial involvement from an early stage, and understanding the global markets. What I will say, it's one of the first times that I've really spent utilizing my clinical and pharmaceutical background. I understanding clinical trials, getting involved in that. So to me, yes, major change. Didn't realize how the complexity of it, but it taught me one, again, the advice I tell people, push yourself because I really like my job in the US. I thought my next role would be heading up US, but then took that pivot and changed lateral role to get the global side in there. There is no head of US. So I never, if I stayed, I wouldn't even get that role because that's not how we're structured. So I am super fortunate I took that and that it did teach me a lot and I learned a lot.
And at this stage in your career and life, how do you define fulfillment?
It comes in a lot of different ways. I will say it's been a really difficult time. It's been so busy. I'd love to travel Kaushik. I'm leaving soon to go on a trip to South Africa. It's always been on my bucket list to go on a safari.
Wow.
So one of the things, people like to spend money on different things. For me, I like to spend money on traveling. So
Trouble.
the whole family, that to me, I don't know if you wanted me to give you a work answer, but I'll say fulfillment for me is like spending time with family and going on trips and seeing the world. To me, that's always been important to me. I think fulfillment at work is, again, doing a good job, seeing people succeed, doing well for your team, getting something for the patients. There's fulfillment there for sure. Again, I really want to emphasize how important it is to understand, that there's a patient behind everything.
When it's all said and done, what's the one impact you hope you've had on the people you've led?
I hope I've been a good role model, Kaushik. I hope I taught them parts to be a leader that have helped them become a leader. I hope I've helped them move up in their career. And when I say role model, like to balance work and life. Sometimes it's not easy to do that. And I really, truly mean that family does come first. And I know there's always been, people that reported to me, family issues that have come up. And, I've never, ever said, don't put your family first. I'm always like, take that time, do what you need to do and we'll get it done. And I truly believe no matter what role you have in that organization, there's nothing more important than that. So I think if you ever could poll people that reported to me, I hope that that's what they would say about me. That I was able to prioritize my family. And I know it hasn't been hard. I remember when my kids were really young, I remember going to California in that one day and taking a red eye like that night, and now my kids are older. I would never do that. But, you make trade-offs.
And that brings us to the end of what has been a truly eye-opening conversation. Annette, thank you. Not just for your time, but also for your honesty, your clarity, and the depth of insights you've shared with us today. In a world that often celebrates speed and scale, your words have reminded us of the quiet power of intention and the importance of doing the right thing even when no one's watching. To everyone listening, if you've ever doubted whether real change can happen from within, I hope today's conversation gave you a little bit more faith, because it can, and it does through leaders like Anit. Thank you again, Annette. It's been an absolute honor to have you on Drug Diaries.
Thank you, Kaushik. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's a great time.